We have now reached fragments and phrases. Do you remember the 5 elements that we have learned and memorized by now? Of all the 5 things that are required to make up even the most basic sentence, even our simple sentence is going to have these 5 elements. The more complex the sentence is, the more elements we are going to have. But at a bare minimum, every sentence needs 5 elements. If you're wondering what happens if you forget any of these 5 elements, the result is that you're going to have a fragment. A fragment is defined as a group of words that is portrayed as a sentence, but is not a true sentence. A fragment is not a true sentence because it's missing any of the 5 elements. Most of the time, what's missing is the subject or the verb. How this happens is writers, they get really excited, they just start writing, they're on a roll, and they don't stop to pay really close attention to their structure, to the order in which they put things. They're not making sure that every single line is filled in. So do you remember we talked briefly about sentence construction and how we have a line for our subject, a line for our verb, a line for an object, and then a mental checklist for the 2 elements of our complete thought, followed by end punctuation at the end. When you have a fragment, one of those fill in the blank lines have been omitted. Again, typically it's the subject or it's the verb. When you have a fragment, it is often extremely confusing to the reader, especially if there's multiple fragments in a row. Now, this isn't the case in creative writing. In creative writing, the readers are engaged in the plot, in the story, in the emotion, in the drama, in the effects. They aren't paying attention to the words. They're lost in the story. However, in any other writing, whether it's academic, if you're doing research or reports, if you're doing business correspondence, all of those, your reader is reading for the words. They're reading to be informed based on this conglomeration of words that you give them. Even if your reader has never heard of the 5 elements, even if they don't know the formula, S plus V plus O, mental check for our complete thought, and punctuation equals a simple sentence, if they've never heard that, if they don't even know what a subject and a verb is, that doesn't matter. All that they know is that when they read a sentence that is missing one of these elements, it instinctually feels incomplete to them. Something doesn't feel right. And it's often confusing because we get a great deal of information, especially coming from our subject and our verb. If we don't know who the sentence is about, or what idea, what person, place, or thing this sentence is about, it leaves out a lot of information that leaves the reader guessing or lost or confused. All things we do not want our reader to experience. We want our reader to be engaged in our writing, and every single word matters. Every single word, every single element has a primary purpose that is important. We want our reader to be fully informed, and at a minimum, every sentence needs these 5 elements. If you have your end punctuation, but any of these other elements are missing, you have a fragment. You want to be really careful to pick out fragments, and even better, to prevent them from ever happening. If you follow the formula and if you do a mental check, even if you pull up your fingers and do it exactly like I'm doing, and check that you have a subject, check that you have a verb, check that you have an object if you're doing academic writing. If you're doing creative writing, again, the object is not required. Check that you have, mentally check, this will not be a fill in the blank, that you have a complete thought, which is going to be your 2 sub-elements of 1 main point and no unanswered question. And then, of course, if it's a fragment, it will always have that end punctuation. It is not a fragment. It will never be a fragment if it doesn't have end punctuation. This is the complete opposite of clauses. remember that clauses will never ever have end punctuation and be a clause. What makes it a clause is that it does not have end punctuation. Fragments will always have end punctuation. So what if you have something that doesn't quite make up a clause, right? Remember our hierarchy. So if it's not a sentence and it's not a clause, it doesn't have end punctuation, what does that leave us with? That leaves us with a phrase. A phrase is almost identical to a fragment, but it's missing the end punctuation. A phrase is defined as a group of words that doesn't meet the elements of becoming a sentence. However, with our phrases and our fragments, if you simply discover what is missing and add that in, you then can upgrade, you can climb the ladder, you can get higher in the hierarchy and have a proper sentence. So make sure that you go through all of the elements. It is very important to double check every single element to make sure that you have what it is you think you have. If you're writing a clause and you're practicing your clauses, remember your 4 elements. Both independent and dependent clauses each have 4 elements, but the last element is opposite. Remember our sentences. At minimum, our simple sentence has all 5 elements. When you get into more sophisticated sentence, they will have even more elements than that. Our fragments will always have a period, but will lack one of the 5 elements, typically a subject or a verb. And a phrase is essentially a fragment, but without the end punctuation. A fragment is punctuated, a phrase is not. That is everything you need to know about phrases and fragments. Continue to work really hard on your 5 elements to make sure that you do not end up accidentally with a phrase or a fragment.